Hello, 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 hello. This is Jay Real, the host of Real Family Talk. Wanted to reach out and let people know what I've been thinking about what's going on in Ferguson. I've been on hiatus, and I just wanted to kind of reach out and put some thoughts out there in the air. So obviously by now we know the verdict, or the grand jury decision, I should say, and they decided that Darren Wilson did not need to be indicted for his actions in Ferguson. What they say is a lot of that information was based off of the idea that when the information was printed to the grand jury, Darren Wilson had an opportunity to present his side, and they also put up several witnesses, black witnesses, they made a point to point that out, that corroborated the story that he gave. In addition to that, of course, they listened to, they say, some medical examiners who presented what seemed to be conflicting information as well. Some of them supported some of the ideas that the family and a lot of the witnesses that weren't in the grand jury said, which is that, he was off from a distance from Darren Wilson, his hands was in the air, and at some point he was shot down. And then, of course, there's the autopsies that sort of suggest that he was in close proximity of Darren Wilson, which is what Darren Wilson argues. And Darren Wilson was shooting in what is to believe to be self-defense. So, end result, though, Darren Wilson will not be indicted for his actions that related to the death of Michael Brown. And so the fallout, of course, we've seen that too by now. So we know that they were looting in the streets, fires, businesses on fire, cars on fire. Several dozens of arrests were made. I heard something today that the church that Michael Brown's mother went to even was lit on fire. So all kinds of chaos happening in Ferguson. People clearly upset about the decision. Even across the country, people are putting on protests and doing stage-ins where they're pretending to be dead in malls across the country, and just protests across the country in New York, a bunch of states across the country. So people are clearly upset about this verdict. For me, what's profound here to me is not so much the verdict, because to me the verdict is not even surprising, and I think to most people, I don't think they'll find the verdict surprising. I am disappointed though, in especially the looting. I read an article by Tanisha Coates, and he gave some examples of where looting and rioting served a positive purpose in our history. But here's where I disagree with him. I think if we look at in history, sure, I can see where things, and he pointed out some specific examples where looting and rioting presented a positive result in the end. In this particular situation, though, I think it's looting and rioting to what end, though? You're rioting and you're looting. When you're rioting and looting your own neighborhood, all you're doing is destroying your neighborhood. Because at the end of the day, we're destroying businesses that were probably mom and pop businesses that were at least surviving in the neighborhood. And so now that they're gone, potentially maybe they come back, maybe they take the insurance money and run. But in any case, you've lost something in that community at this point in terms of the businesses. You're looting, you're putting cars and stuff on fire, probably in your neighborhood. So now some of your neighbors are without vehicles due to the fact that you were upset of what some grand jury decided. And so at the end of the day, what purpose did you serve? You proved to a nation who already expected you to act a fool, and you did just that, act a fool. Even the state, the governor of the state basically sent out the National Guard in preparation of you acting like a fool, and then you served his purpose and proved that at least he needed an increased police presence. They chose military in order to keep you in check. So while I see his point of history, when I look at today, I see no point. I don't see a purpose served. Nobody's going to listen to you more because you looted and rioted in the city. As a matter of fact, most people are looking at you in a negative light, especially the people who you're trying to grab the attention of. Because you don't need to grab the attention of black people. Black people are with you. So who did you need? Whose attention did you need? You need attention of white people who are in power to hopefully make some changes that will result in the next Michael Brown not being shot. And so all you did for those people, though, is confirm their thoughts and their fears. These people might kill me if I don't do what they want. So there is no purpose served. It didn't serve a purpose. It goes back to the last huge riot that we had in this country in LA after the Rodney King verdict. Again, we destroyed the LA neighborhood. Some of those businesses never came back. Some of them probably got insurance checks and got out of town. And what has changed in Los Angeles? Absolutely nothing. So in our society today, looting and rioting serves no purpose. It brings us forward. It doesn't bring us forward to anything but proof to those that think of us, black people I'm referring to, negatively. It only confirms their fears that we are negative. So it doesn't serve a purpose, and it doesn't bring any clarity to the situation. At the end of the day, I think we're misguided in what we're doing anyway. We're looking to a system who we already believe is against us, black people, looking for that system to validate wrongs against us. Does that make any sense? We believe a system which is unjust is going to somehow provide justice when we need it. We don't believe it in the first place, but we wait and surprise and we get angry and upset, loot our own neighborhoods when it does what we already knew it was going to do, which is provide injustice to us, black people. That doesn't make sense to me. We're riding this hamster wheel of situations. We're not actually providing any real solutions, any real change to any of these situations. We're not having the conversations beyond the police need to stop killing us. We're not having those conversations to move us forward beyond that. Because at the end of the day, as we see continuously, the police are killing us. Rioting, looting, protests aren't changing those situations. So what are we going to do to change those situations? That's the question at hand. Not stop killing us. They ain't going to stop killing us. Because every time we act a fool, it only validates the fact that they might need to kill us. I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying what is the thought process, people? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about what's right. We're talking about the thought process. Every time we act a fool, that only validates them acting a fool. Because they say, in their minds, they're thinking, well, you know what they did the last time? Man, I ain't even going to take a chance to see if that's what's going to happen. If they're going to be peaceful this time, I'm just shoot them. I mean, let's be real. This is cops and robbers, quote unquote, if you will. We're in the streets. These people are half the time alone, facing situations that may or may not be dangerous. They don't know. Some of them are scared in the first place. They get into a situation and they react. And then, we get upset. When are we going to stop this hamster wheel? When are we going to address the issues in our own communities and deal with them ourselves? Because we already know the system isn't going to change it for us. We know this. So why are we upset that it ain't doing it when we already know it's not? Doesn't make sense, people. It's a hamster wheel. That's what we're on, a hamster wheel. A hamster wheel. So when I examine the facts of Michael Brown, I examine let's say not the facts, the innuendo of Michael Brown. Let's say the innuendo of Trayvon Martin. For me, there's a couple of things that I noticed, okay? Two things. One, when both of these individuals passed, we set up a false pretense of what they were for American society. What do I mean? The first thing we did in both of these instances is paint these people as these angels, quote unquote, that were somehow wronged and shot to death. That was our first mistake. We painted them as angels that were somehow wrong and then shot to death, okay? First mistake. Second mistake, we perpetuated it. We went on national TV. We went on everywhere we can to prove how sweet and gentle these people were, these little boys were, to prove a point. And then what does the media do? They did their job, if you will, right? They did a little bit of research and found out that, okay, well, they're not all sweet and kind and innocent. They do have some checkered past, and so Again, they're looking for proof to validate why shots are fired. That's what they're doing. So when we paint them as these sweet individuals, and then they go find a little bit of dirt on them, again, it validates their thought process. It validates their thought process. It makes them feel like, well, maybe there was some right in this shot. That's the problem. So rather than get upset at them for shooting them, why not examine ourselves and say, what can we do to prevent some of these situations? Because let's be honest, we can prevent some of these situations. We already know we live in a society that is fearful of black men, whether they be 17, whether they be 18, whether they be 25, whether they be 35, whether they be 45, 55, 65. We live in a society that is scared of black men. So why are we not continuing to try and educate the community? Because that's who's going to have to change is the community. They're not going to change. This is America. We live in a racist society. It's racism that doesn't slap us in the face anymore, of course, but it's a racist society because we all have prejudices, black people, white people, brown, Spanish, green, purple, yellow. Everybody has those prejudices that set them up for what I'll deem racist moments. We all have them. We all have them. So rather than deny what racism exists or deny that we're not shooting a fair path, we should be changing our situation as best as we can to prevent further shootings. How do we do that? Education. It comes to education. We already know as black men, again, doesn't matter your age, they're all fearful of you. Don't matter what you are. Don't matter if you have on a business suit. Doesn't matter if you have on a hoodie. Doesn't matter. They're fearful of you. Why? Simply because you're a black man and they just don't know. Because society, over a period of years, has always painted the black man as an individual that just might do something that you might not like. It doesn't make sense. I don't know why they've done this to us, but that's what they've done. And so we all have a natural instinct to those prejudices that set us up for potential racial moments. So again, going back to these situations that occurred. In both of these situations, one thing that was evident in both of these situations, when I'm talking about Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin, the two high-profile cases that we keep discussing, two things are really evident here. The first thing, two things that were evident, is both gentlemen showed instances of anger, frustration, and aggression towards the individuals that eventually perpetuated the acts upon them. Anger, aggression are the two things that I think every black man knows you don't want to bring to anybody of authority, anybody who you don't know, because that potential danger always exists, especially when it comes to cops. Because on average, the cop is expecting you to show him anger and aggression because you're black. You're a black man. That's the expectation. That's as far as I see it. And I may be wrong, and please tell me if I'm wrong. I'm okay with that. But my expectation is that they expect anger and aggression from you simply because you're a black man. And so the thing that I always do, the thing that I encourage people to do, especially black men, is to kill them with as much kindness as possible. Show them that their expectation is incorrect. Yes, sir, no, sir. What can I do for you, sir? I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize that, sir. Kindness, kindness, kindness. For one, it drops their guard down a tad bit now. Because now they're not on high alert because they expected you to be angry and aggressive. They've dropped their guard down slightly because, wait a minute, He is just as kind as the next guy. He's not here to hurt me, blah, 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 blah. You can fill in the blank. I don't know. I'm just making comments. It's a natural progression. When you speak to people with a smile, with a kind voice, it eases them on whatever their expectations were of you. It's a natural experience that people have, regardless of the situation. It's the first thing that we ought to be doing. It's the first thing that we ought to be teaching our children. That's the first thing. And in both of those instances, they didn't do that. I'm not saying that's their fault that they didn't do that and that now they deserve to get what they got. That's not my point. But my point is there are things that we can do to help curb some of these instances. Keep the level of tension down. Because that's what brings us to these situations is when we increase the tension. So bring the tension down. So that's the first thing. Kill them with kindness. Kill them with respect. Because they don't expect that. Because society has told them that we're not going to give that. So that's the first thing. The next thing is we got to be mindful of what the prejudices are. We know what they are. So let's be mindful of them. We know that as a black man, if I walk through certain neighborhoods looking a particular way, the expectation is I don't belong there. The expectation is I'm up to no good. We already know this. So if I know that if I dress a particular way in a particular neighborhood, that this is what the expectation is going to be, well, if I'm going to go to that neighborhood, well, then I ought to be appropriate for that neighborhood. Not because it's going to change, not because it's automatically going to change the perception, but at least, again, it's about bringing the tension down. Because if I'm in that neighborhood and I'm dressed, quote unquote, like people of that neighborhood, then at least the tension when you come to see me is slightly decreased because I sort of look the part of somebody that's supposed to be here, even though your perception may be I don't. Tension. It's about keeping the tension levels down. Again, does that prevent a situation from happening? No. It doesn't necessarily prevent it, but it keeps the tension down enough that just maybe, we might be able to prevent a negative situation. So be mindful of where you are and dress appropriately for those occasions. You know, we're talking with some friends of mine, and we talked about just that. You know, there's no way in the world you catch me in a nice, quote-unquote, neighborhood. A neighborhood where the average person would not expect a black person to be, dressed in anything. You know, I certainly wouldn't have my pants hanging down. Certainly wouldn't do that. I certainly wouldn't have my face covered to the point where you don't know what I'm doing, what I'm looking like. I'd be appropriate for that venue because I already know. You know, you don't go to a business dinner dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. Why? Because it's not appropriate. Because my coming in with that jeans and the t-shirt sets a tone for that business meeting that is against what I'm trying to portray. It's the same concept. We have to be mindful of these things. We have to teach our kids these things. Yeah, it's 2014. I get it. Man, I should be able to dress and do whatever I want to do. It's 2014, man. If this is my style, then this is what I should be able to do. I hear you, but I'm talking about reality here. I'm talking about saving lives. I'm talking about preventing situations from escalating. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about what you should be able to do. I'm talking about reality. And the reality is, if you look a certain way, if you act a certain part, prejudices exist in this society today that ain't going nowhere. A conversation ain't going to change them. Conversation may recognize them, but truth be told, the people that you're trying to get that information to, they've already closed the door on your conversation. So you gotta anticipate what they're thinking in order to be able to prevent from them doing something negative to you. And you say, oh, that's too much. I shouldn't have to do that. I hear you, but I'm trying to save a life. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. I'm just being honest with you. You know, these are the situations that we deal with. We got to recognize where we are until things have changed and progressed far enough that the ideal situation does exist. But right now, this is where it's at. This is where it's at. And that's what we need to deal with. And we need to be honest with ourselves about it. And we need to teach our children, especially our children, about it so that they can avoid some of these pitfalls in their life and prevent them from dying unnecessarily. And I think that's our job as parents to do that. Because we know. We've had the history. We've seen the experience. We learned the history. So it's time to bring that forward. And I think that's where today there's a lack because children don't know the history anymore. They don't know what happened. They live in this fantasy where racism doesn't exist, where we know it does. And it's our job to teach them how to avoid those pitfalls that racism or not recognizing racism may lead them down. So that's another lesson that I think we ought to take away from this. And then, to kind of wrap this up a little bit, a couple more points that we have to do that are really lacking. We riot, we protest, and we loot, which again, as I've already pointed out, it makes some of us feel good. Some of us get some free stuff out of it, and that makes us feel even better. But like I already said, truth be told, it's not solving any of our problems. The thing that we need to start doing more often is we need to vote. A lot of us have this mentality that voting doesn't change anything. Well, you're right. A lot of you have that mentality because, one, you don't vote. So because you don't vote, you're right, voting doesn't change anything because you didn't add your opinion to the pot. That's true. And then, two, for those of us that do vote, unfortunately, we're blindly voting for individuals without really considering who they are, what they represent, and what kind of changes they're going to bring to our situation. To use Ferguson as an example. They had an election for the prosecutor of the Michael Brown case. He was up for re-election, and in that particular county, one, he had no opponent in the county, and then two, everybody in the county thinks the man is a racist and is never prosecuted. They say he's never prosecuted a case against a police officer, so they don't like him because he's never prosecuted a case against a police officer. They don't like him because they thought he was not going to indict Darren Wilson, which of course was proven to be true. But yet, the man got reelected in the county. So for another couple of years, he's still going to be the prosecutor in that county. So the next time a case comes up, he's probably, again, not going to prosecute that particular case. But yet, when he was up for re-election, he had no opponents. And so he was automatically re-voted right back into the office that everybody says he's doing a poor job at. But voting doesn't matter. Yes, it matters. And here's another sad part. The man is a Democrat, which for most of y'all, if they would have put a Republican against him, because he was a Democrat, y'all would have voted for him anyway because, black people are supposed to vote Democrat. So that's a huge issue, voting. How are you going to change anything if you don't vote? Here's a man who only has his office because votes put him in there, but yet nobody likes him, but nobody will vote him out. I mean, come on. Is there not a black Democrat in the county that can run against him at least? Or a Republican in the county that can run against him? This notion that we're supposed to blindly vote for one party in all situations is ridiculous. It's killing us. Killing us. One, because none of us vote because we don't expect change to happen. And then two, if we're voting blindly for individuals, not even recognizing what they represent, we're still not solving our problems. So yes, we need to vote, but more importantly, we need to find out who we're voting for and drop this notion that every Democrat's on our side. Every Republican is against us. Independents don't matter. It's all not true. Voting matters. The vote that you give today will change your life tomorrow if you support that vote. And what I mean by support that vote, it's about accountability. If you're going to vote for an individual, then you need to hold that individual accountable for the things that you want them to do. So if you're going to vote for this prosecutor to be back in office and you don't like what he does, then you need to let him know. I didn't appreciate the fact that you didn't indict Darren Wilson. I didn't appreciate the fact that you presented information that painted Darren Wilson in such a way that you couldn't get back an indictment. You need to let them know that the next time you have an opportunity to vote, you're going to vote for somebody else. You're going to support a candidate to come out the woodworks and actually run against this man who you say is wrong. It's the same thing. I look at the same thing in Florida. Angela Corey. You had to vote Angela Corey into office. They believe Angela Corey wronged Marissa Alexander. They believe Angela Corey messed up the George Zimmerman case. But she's still there. Voting, people. I'm sure she's a Democrat as well. Voting. Voting matters. If you're not going to vote, what are you doing? You're wasting our time. Protests don't matter. Looting doesn't matter. Riots don't matter. Votes matter. Because votes lead to money. Money definitely matters. And if you don't believe nothing else, I know you believe money matters. Because as the votes come, so does the money. The candidates that can get the votes get the money. So if you start supporting individuals and can prove that that individual can get votes from you, and then again, accountability is a huge part of this thing. You got to hold these people accountable. Then perhaps you can get some of the people that you want into office so that your situations can change. You know, they talk a lot about stand your ground in Florida. Okay, stand your ground. Everybody wants to say it's a bad deal. I disagree. I like stand your ground. I don't have a problem with it. I think it should stay. But again, that can change if you vote. In Florida, for the last few years, we've had state houses dominated by Republicans. Guess what? That law ain't going nowhere because Republicans aren't going to change it. So if you want that law changed, if that's your goal, well, then you need to get up off your seat and go vote for some of these Democrats that are trying to get into office. And once you get them into office, perhaps then they can bring the change that you seek. But if you're not going to vote in order to get these people in office, you're not going to see no change. You're going to sit there, you're going to protest, you're going to riot, you're going to loot, and stand your ground is still going to be a law. And as you see it, it's going to kill more black men. I don't see it with you. I don't agree with it. I don't have no problem with standing your ground. But from the perception, that's what's going to happen. It is all rooted in voting. Voting, voting, voting. You know, that's what it's rooted in. So if we're not going to do that, if we're not going to vote, if we're not going to hold these people accountable, in my opinion, I'm really sick of it. It's not doing anything. It's a hamster wheel. It's not solving the problem. End of the day, I know we're not surprised by the grand jury result in Darren Wilson's case. End of the day, we're still not voting, so as far as I'm concerned, we're really not serious about making changes in our society, especially when it comes to the justice system, because that prosecutor, that county prosecutor, is an elected position. So for all you people that don't like your county prosecutors, if you're still voting for the same individual, one, or two, not voting for any individual, then by default, you're supporting what that prosecutor is doing, so you're at fault. And then three, if we're going to vote and not hold anybody accountable, then we're still wasting our time. Change is possible, people. It's in our hands. If our communities are going to change, it's going to come from us. It's going to come from the black people that live in those communities, black people who know people in those communities, and educating ourselves on how we can rise above our situation. It's not going to come from the justice system. It's not going to be provided by the government. They're not going to acknowledge it. Two, I don't really think they care because it's not their problem. When you look at the actual numbers of how many have actually died, it's very minuscule in the big concept of America. So it's not big enough for the government to care. So if anybody's going to make that change, it's going to come from the community. Two, if the community's not going to vote for people who are actually going to provide change, again, we're still on that hamster wheel. We have to vote. You know, all those people that sit out there and complain and complain and complain, you know, I for one, I'm tired of it because you're not doing anything. You're not solving the problem. I don't want to hear about how it don't change nothing. You know, there's a million of you. You know, looking at this past election, in the particular county that my show airs, approximately 60% of the county or the participants didn't even vote. 60%. That's enough people to change whoever was elected in whatever office that happened in that county. Voting matters. The second thing, or the third thing, like I said, is accountability. Whoever you vote for, hold them accountable to whatever you want them to be accountable for. And if they're not providing it to you, give your vote to somebody else. Drop this Democrat, Republican, Independent garbage. It doesn't matter. There's good Republicans, there's good Democrats, there's great independents, there's bad Republicans, there's bad Democrats, there's bad independents. They're all the same. Find the one that you can support. Forget the party, because parties don't matter. It really doesn't. At the end of the day, they're all in Washington. They're all in Tallahassee. They're all in the state capitals. And as much as they argue, bitter, and fight on TV, they're still all friends. So it doesn't matter. They still all pull the same tricks. Doesn't matter. Parties don't matter. Every party does the same exact thing. Individuals do. Find individuals that you believe you can trust in. Vote for that individual. Be truthful about where the change is going to come from. And perhaps eventually we can get to some of that change. But at the end of the day, I hope we can stop just protesting. I hope we can stop just looting, just rioting. Because that's the hamster wheel, people. That's not solving our problems. It's not moving us in the right direction. And at the end of the day, it's only a matter of time before we see the next Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, fill in the blank. So let's start doing something that's going to actually provide change to the community. Let's focus on changing our own communities and stop worrying about what everybody else outside the community has to say. Because we already know one thing. We don't need an opinion from Rudy Giuliani, from Sean Hannity, from fill in the blank, your next best conservative, to break down what's happening in the community. Because for one, they've never been. They only see it from the outside looking in. And at the end of the day, they only want to talk about what their opinion is, not what your truth from being there is. So let's stop responding to them, giving them fuel for the fire to talk about how we're wrong, and just go in our own communities, change our own situations, continue to encourage us to vote, and encourage us to hold those people accountable for whom we choose to vote. And just stop the nonsense. Change can happen. It won't happen overnight. It's not going to happen magically in 2015. We're all going to see a beautiful day. But if we work on ourselves, we work on our communities, we actually start voting, we'll see that change that we're looking for. And that's what I got to say, people. Oh, I take that back. One last thing. If I read another thing about voter suppression, I'm thinking I'm going to slap somebody. Here's my one comment on that. I, for one, don't believe in voter suppression. I'm not afraid of voter ID laws. I don't mind voter ID laws. I don't think they're hurting anybody. At the end of the day, when it comes to an ID, we get IDs for whatever we want. For those of us that want to drink, we make sure we have an ID to drink alcohol. Some of us, even before we turn 21. For those of us that want to smoke cigarettes, we make sure we have an ID to get our cigarettes. For those of us that live in some of these states where they have miracle marijuana legal, I'm sure you need an ID to get some of those, to get that prescription card. And so for those of us that are looking to get those kinds of cards, I'm sure we make sure we have an ID to get that prescription card. For those of us that fly across the country, go to other countries outside of North America, we make sure we have IDs for that. My point, when we need an ID, we make sure we have an ID. So the idea that needing an ID to vote somehow begins to suppress our vote because some of us don't have access to IDs, I'm sorry, I think it's nonsense. It's 2014. All of us, most of us can read. Most of us know somebody who reads really well. So if a law is changed, there's ample time for us to educate ourselves if we're serious about trying to find out what's really going on to prevent any kind of suppression because there's a voter ID law. Because if you're serious about voting, you're already doing the research on the candidates who are up for election. You're doing research on the laws that could be changed by the voting process, that voting cycle, so that if a new law comes along, because you're doing your research and you're paying attention to what's happening in your society, locally, on a state level, and nationally, any new law that comes up, you're aware. So I don't believe that there's voter suppression. The problem is not suppression. The problem is ignorance. It's voter ignorance. So change your ignorance, get active, and you won't be suppressed. It's 2014. The information is easily and readily available for you. You just have to click on it and search. Those are my thoughts, people. If you want to reach out to me, we're on Facebook, Real Family Talk. We're on Twitter, Real Family Talk. You can send me an email, realfamilytalk@gmail.com. Hey, man, I just had to get it out there, get some things off my chest. Remember, we're every Wednesday, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., WOKB Radio, 1680 a.m. in Orlando, or you can listen to us online at realfamilytalk.com. I'll see you when we get back, man. Happy holidays.